Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks again for tuning in another live. So, today we have a special guest. We're going to be talking about different companies that this person has hacked, doing different things, and just talk about everything cybersecurity. So, we have him. His name is Jon. Here he is. What's up, Jon?
How you doing? I'm
Good,
good.
good,
How are
good,
you?
good. Pleasure to
Excited
have
to
you,
be
man.
here. Yeah, hell yeah. Let's
It's
get
been a
into it.
while.
It
Um,
has
it has been a while, and it's when the last time we were actually on a chat was like the nerd chat. So, it's been
six
over.
months at least.
Yeah, no, over a year. I think over a year. I think it's been over a year. But awesome. So, the topic today is about, hacking Fortune 100 companies. And just like the first question, like, how did you get into this world of hacking, pen testing, web stuff, whatever you do on a daily? Like, what really triggered your interest?
Sure. Yeah. I mean my interest really started on like the physical side of it. I always looked up to things like Ocean's 11 and stuff like that when I was really little. And then as I had my first email when I was 6. I started to explore the internet more. Things like, I hosted my own RuneScape private server, so a video game private server on my home PC. So that kind of forced me to learn, about networking and port forwarding and all that kind of stuff. And then it kind of snowballed. Um, so by the time I was in high school, I cracked like all my neighbors' Wi-Fi's. I would be the one at parties, which is pretty weird. But I'd go to like house parties to like piggyback off of someone else's Wi-Fi and like do an SQL injection on like some random sites I found. Um, and then that again kind of snowballed from there. And so by the time I was about 18, that was like the height of anonymous. And that's when I learned that like you can make this into a real career. And then kind of once I knew that that was like a possibility, it kind of I just kind of like straight shot from there. So
Cool. So that's pretty interesting. So, you know, I know you're not a big certification guy, right? So there's many folks out there that, aren't. There's like many, I know some powerful guys in the pen testing hacking world that they don't believe in certs, right? And obviously you're one of them. And on the flip side of that, there's people that have certs and they die by certs and like, okay, like if you have this certification, it proves that you know X, Y, Z.
hmm
So I'm not going to ask you, okay, what is your recommendation of getting certs? But
well, yeah, I mean we can talk. I'm not an anti-cert guy.
mhm,
I think the port trigger one, that one's super cool. OCP like pretty cool. Um, I think the thing with certs that people need to realize is like it's not an end all. It's not like you get that and they're not going to question you. So
mhm,
you still have to stay up to date. And I think the big difference was though was like when I started to get into stuff like there weren't really certs. Like you kind of had to cross a line of be a gray hat esque. You know what I mean?
mhm.
To get the experience. And I am a full cert guy because I don't really think that's possible. Now, like cert, CTF, Vuln Hub, however you want to choose to get that knowledge. But I think that like today, like realistically, of course, you're not, you do some little SQL injection on a site, get caught, and that from doing enough engagements where like you see the client doesn't notice what you're doing.
Mhm.
But I think that's a line I wouldn't cross today. So if I were to get back into today, I think I would lean a lot more heavy on the Vuln hubs, on the CTFs, on the certs. I just think I come from a time where like, that wasn't really a thing, if that makes sense.
No, and that makes total sense. And I remember when I started doing the hacking world, right? When I got into pen testing and I got into this space, I was told, okay, get your CEH, get your did this. But in the beginning, I was more interested in like forensics. I don't really talk too much about this, but like I was really into like forensics and doing. I love to go to court. I love to take apart hard drives, go into a lab with little white gloves, and take
hmm
apart the platters. That was really really intriguing to me, and that's when I went for
hmm
my CHFI, Certified Hacking Forensics Investigator, learning
Okay.
more about in case, different kind of applications,
hmm
deeper, memory, go into the memory of the drives,
I actually
RAM
have
and all.
experience with that. So
Yeah.
my associates was criminal justice cybersecurity. So
Hmm.
I did like 4 or 5 courses on digital forensics. Like that was the main focus. So actually, I've used NCASE. I've used, oh God, I don't know, all that stuff. Because
Autopsy,
yeah.
in-case. Yep.
In fact, I still have Pro Discover, which is like
Pro
not even
Discover.
made anymore. But I have like the installer, and like
Hmm.
because they don't make it anymore, like you can just disconnect from the internet and it'll like just let you use it basically. I still have
Yeah.
that to this day, and like I'm holding on to it because you can't get it anymore, and it's really fun. I just think the downside to that side of the field is like it ends up being a lot of, um, you know, it, you don't last as like long in the same way that like normally pen testers, security consultants don't
Hmm.
last, but
Hmm.
because you're seeing terrible shit or dealing with terrible stuff,
Yep.
and it's like, I don't know. Personally, like it's really cool. It's very tedious.
Hmm.
Um, but I think again, I mean, to me, it's all yin yang, right? And I can't tell you how many times that I've been on internals where I've used my forensics knowledge, my digital forensics knowledge of like a Windows system, let's say, to
Hmm.
to leverage that in a an internal or in a red team engagement. And I
Hmm.
think that's something that people don't really realize that
Yeah.
again, it all goes together.
So, like you said, the word red teaming. So, like, is there, for the folks that are out there, if they're watching it live now or if they're watching after the fact, like people use things interchangeably, right? Oh, I want to do a red team engagement. I want to do an internal pen test. I want to do a vulnerability assessment. I want to do all these things. Like a lot of these terms are used interchangeably. So, how can someone understand the difference between, okay, I want to have I want to hire you as a red teamer to do a red team engagement, or if I want to hire you to do an actual penetration test? What, y- you know,
Hmm.
which one would I pick in which situation?
Sure. So I think a red team engagement is the larger, more mature. I'd say so for, if your internal security posture is more mature, then you would choose a red team because the idea of a red team, and I'm not going to get into, how it's technically like a no hands bar because there's always rules of engagement. There's always, yes or no's, approval, whatever, right? But at the end of the
Hmm.
day, you're trying to be one, stealthy, right? And then two, you're testing, the blue team. So a red team engagement tends to be more purple team-esque, if that makes
Hmm.
sense, at least when it pivots internally. It depends where the red team starts, but let's just assume, you're saying, should I get an internal or a red team, right? At a red team, I'm gonna use the land. I'm going to be as quiet as I can, right? I'm going to be testing the blue team, keeping logs of everything, very detailed logs, so that when I give the client the report, right, they can go back to their SEM, or whatever, however they choose to log, right, and see if they
Hmm.
can track what I did and how I did it, and see, on their end. And then normally at the end of a red team too, then that's where I'll like be very loud. So if I'm not caught, initially, maybe the last week, the last few days, I'll do like classic internal stuff, like running Bloodhound, for example, and seeing if that gets me caught. Um, on the flip side, uh, a red team can start in many different ways. Like sometimes it's an assumed breach. So, you're plopped on an internal network. And like I said, you live off the land of the system that, you have this shell from, right, as an assumed breach. Sometimes, you have to do the phishing campaigns or the social engineering campaigns, phishing, I mean, all of those, and then again, sometimes it's assumed breach. So it really depends, where the red team starts. But when people usually speak of red team, it's, the difference is that you're stealthier and you're testing the blue team. Whereas with an internal, it's kind of like go crazy and show me as much stuff that you can exploit or find vulnerable as possible, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, exactly, and that's what I think as well. Like if I'm doing a pen test, there's an objective, right? My objective is to maybe get domain admin, or it's whatever the case may be, right? And then write up a pretty report. A red team engagement can last a month, it can last 4 months, it can last a year, you know. And all right, yeah, that's pretty good for the folks that maybe don't they hear these, oh, red team, I'm a red team, I'm a pen tester, and just to really differentiate the two. So cheers for that. Thanks. So So what is going on in your world? Like, GainSec or John or whatever you want to go by. Like, what is like a day in a life with you? Like, what do you do? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, the day to life, at least when it comes to GateSec, is pretty slow at the moment. I mean, a few exceptions. Like I got that article on Unredacted, right? That was a really cool moment for GateSec. I
Mhm.
spoke at a local hacker meetup, in Paris. That was really cool. But day to day, either I do some type of OSINT project, whether that be just like straight like search engine dorking, or I'm working on a project now that is like a compilation of like all these license plates that popular YouTubers include in their videos. So keeping track of that and kind of gonna make something about that in the future, kind of like a case study. But as for my day job, my firm that I work at was just acquired by NetSpy, so technically I'm at NetSpy now. Um, and let's see, last week I did a source code review. The week before that, I had an iOS mobile test. Both of those were, for Fortune. I mean, oh God, Fortune 500, Fortune 100, maybe. I don't know. I mean, they're big, big companies. And then this next week coming up, I have a 2 week web app engagement, web app pen test for Fortune 20. So it changes day to day. In between that, I'm part of like, all of our service lines. I've kind of put my nose in that. So I have a bunch of meetings with that.
Mhm.
But, it's pretty standard. I don't work 9 to 5, but that's out of choice.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would say the bulk of my day is, testing something, maybe an hour or two of meetings at most a day, and then I don't know, whatever else I fancy, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds good. So what would you say? Like, okay, like you say, mobile app, web app. Like, what is your like strength? Like, what is your like your go to? Like, I want to be, you know, I'm the man at this. Like,
Sure, my specialty, you can say.
yeah, I guess yeah, specialty.
Um, I would say web app and external. Those are my two like bread and butters. But I do mobile apps pretty frequently, iOS and Android. I do source code reviews once in a while. I do internals once in a while. What else? I don't know. Red team once in a while, phishing campaigns. Um, but yeah, so those two are my strengths. And then I would say like the rest would be like, 20% of my time would be like, would be maybe an internal, maybe a phishing campaign, maybe a red team, maybe an internal, maybe or I do a lot of thick clients as well. Yeah. But yeah, those are my two specialties.
Cool, cool. So, say I'm brand new, right? Like, I'm a
Uh,
new in. You know me personally off camera. I'm not a web guy. I don't do web
mhm,
app stuff. So for someone that doesn't, that maybe still in college or still in school, or maybe just not in school, just and they want to be a web app pen tester,
uh,
where should they start as a fundamental ground,
uh,
and to get in at least into an interview. Now at least I can pass an interview. It would ask me about the OS top 10, blah blah
uh,
blah, whatever web app people ask you.
sure.
Um, so
Yeah,
where
and I've noticed that interviews now like tend to be more like source code review as well. They show like a Go, HTTP client and server, right, or a Python, right, web server, and they kind of say, so it is just beyond like what is a success, and explain it to me. Like it's beyond that. So I obviously, OWASP has its own manual, like the AVSS or whatever it is, AVAS or
Mhm.
whatever that is. That is great. But to start as like a beginner, I think just like, I mean, if you have any experience, as in networking, like for example, like Wireshark, like I think to be honest, even opening up Wireshark and hitting a site and seeing like the DNS in there, the TCP packet for the HTTP request, that
Mhm.
is like if that makes sense, like that clicks, okay, oh look, it's just like a packet like everything else, right? And then to
Mhm.
go from there, it would be like, with the browser tools, developer tools in your browser, or better, Zap or Burp or something. And then, you navigate to a website and you kind of just Google what are these pieces, That's to really start from like nothing, right? Like that's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
And then, a step above that would just be, OWASP juice shop if you want, or whatever, right? Like just reading about what these are and then reading about maybe what I like to do better than, the OWASP explanations.
Hmm.
I like to look up like bug bounty reports, right? If I can find a bug bounty report on like, let's say a reflected XSS, I tend to understand at least more applicable skills to that from a bug bounty report or from an example pen test report, let's say from a firm, which you can just, Google Dork to find an example report, than I
Hmm.
would from reading, the description on OWASP, if that makes sense.
1,000%. Yep. No, that makes sense. That's cool. And hopefully, that's informative for folks out there because, you know, you've been telling me to do this for over a year. Like, dude, like get more into the web stuff, get more into the web stuff. I'm the first one to say this. Like, if something doesn't spark my interest, like it's super, super hard to really like sit
Yeah.
down. It's like, okay, let's go say, okay, something that we enjoy doing outside of this world, right? Skateboarding. We both like to skateboard, right? And if someone says, "Oh, like if you never like to skate stairs, if you not, didn't like to skate rails or whatever, and you're always like, a park guy, and now let's go skate this 10 or let's go skate this rail or whatever," you're never gonna try to hop on that rail because you don't feel comfortable doing it. You like to skate your park or your box or your flat ground or whatever you like to skate. While like what's his name? The kid that's killing it, Nigel Houston, right? Nigel,
Nigel.
right? Nigel, and that kid is like a rail fanatic, right? Like a
Mm.
kid kills it. And then you have someone very technical, like I don't even know who's skating these days, but like the old P Rod, P Rod just likes to skate his park now because he's getting older too. But like he was really technical, back in the day. Josh Kalis, Stevie Williams, I know the old school guys. I don't know who these new kids are, but like all these guys, like to skate, a box and skate like little ledges. But if you put, you can't. I guess like whatever's in your comfort zone, you're gonna gravitate to. That's my point. Like the
Hmm.
web stuff, it's not really something that I enjoyed, so it's really hard for me to like focus. Like, hey, let's do this. Let's dive into it. Unless I'm doing it like with a group, like like I can feed information. But like you just say for me to do it, it's like so. The reason why I'm saying that is like, okay, how does someone overcome that? Like, how can you really discipline yourself? Or have you ever had to do that? Right? Like it's not something you really want to do, you're not interested in, but you have to do it because whatever it is.
Hmm.
Not only IT, not only, just in life. Like how can
Sure.
someone overcome
Yeah.
that?
I mean, I'm not yeah, it's getting pretty interpersonal. I would say how I'm not great at it, right? I struggle with self-discipline the same way. And I'm a firm believer that passion gets you started on something and self-discipline sees it through.
Hmm.
And especially in this industry, if you love hacking, for example, any kind, you'll find a job and then they'll chew you up and spit you out and burn you out, and then you'll say this sucks. And it'll take you a long time to recover from that. How I
Hmm.
kind of get over that is I don't give myself the option, or at least I try not to, right? I say like it doesn't matter if I'm interested or not. It's irrelevant because I know that, one, this is good for my career, this is good for my family, this is good for myself, this leads to more, this is temporary. So in the moment, I may be unhappy, but that's, like Lottie do, you know what I mean? Like I don't have the luxury to be like, I don't want to do this. It's either I
Hmm.
do it or I fail, and that's not an option. So that's kind of how I approach those situations. I will say it is a lot easier, you know, for example, I have a web test coming, on Monday. That's 2 weeks. It's for a Fortune 20, and it's for like some sales like portal. And it's like
Hmm.
that is much more interesting, and you feel much more fulfilled, finding vulnerabilities, finding findings, right, and reporting them to that size of an organization. Because I know now that my work is affecting millions upon millions of people. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the biggest hump is one, understanding that like it's not about finding a command injection or an RCE or even an SSRF every engagement. Like that's just not realistic. You really need to know like 10 findings to be like the standard that organizations expect.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you can choose to go beyond or go below. And then eventually it just becomes second nature and the baseline. And so it doesn't always lead to you finding something, right? But if it's there, you will find it. But yeah, it's a lot easier again from the inside. It's kind of like, I did all this hacking as a kid, da, 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 and then within the first 3 months of working in the industry, I learned more than I did, the 10 years I did it for fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not a thing. It just doesn't compare, and that's kind of like so. I don't give myself the option, and I don't give myself the luxury.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've just been in a lucky situation where when I'm like, I want to do, for example, I want to get more into embedded systems. Well, I can jump straight into, training under a dude and then, for a week or two and then, shadowing or participating in an engagement, for like a car. You know what I mean? Like I could just
Mm-hmm.
jump into these crazy things really fast. And I think that makes it a lot easier and a lot more interesting, if that makes sense.
No, yeah, for sure. No, and that's awesome. So what was like the craziest engagement you've been on? It's like, holy moly, like this was and we can go just say for example an internal, right? Because I understand internals better, right? Like so if you're
Sure.
on an internal, you're like, wow, really? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Holy moly. And I'll share one as well. But yeah, like what is one like, man, like
Uh,
that was easy or and I want to add on to that part, right? Like, and have you ever been on an engagement? We'll go back onto the internals and if or external, whatever, that you're going to town, but there's just nothing. You're just like hitting walls
mhm.
after wall after wall, and it's like, damn it, like those guys have their shit together. I guess you'd
Sure.
say. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think after the first like two or three engagements against any organization, like a state government organization or even like a $10 million, so a pretty small company,
mhm,
you realize how terrible it is.
mhm,
Um, I would say when it's a Windows environment, it's basically a cakewalk, given, maybe they have separate forests, right, and certain, ways or like lines of trust. So it doesn't mean you compromise the whole organization, but wherever you're plopped, right, if you could like open up responder, like you're pretty much good,
mhm,
which is just wild and like stupid. Um,
mhm,
so like the fact that that's a thing, or if not that, then you find some dev, web server or something like that, right? That's just like so crazy, specifically about internals, right? Because I do have a crazy story about an externally facing web server, but one that always sticks to my mind is you know, plopped in, not unauthenticated user, just a guest on the forest, hit up responder, pass the hash, and I just so happened to pick like the CEO's computer, and I'm hitting it, and I navigate to his desktop, and in a folder on his desktop is the bank creds for the organization. Like that's pretty crazy, and it was like like a scanned document they got from from their bank.
yeah,
So it's like, yeah, that's pretty wild, stuff like that. But you see that, like, I can't tell you a lot because, like, you see it so much,
yeah,
it just becomes like, wow, yeah, everything should be on fire and somehow it's not. On the flip side, I was on an engagement, I think it was the last internal I did, um, where it was a big Linux environment. They had a little bit of Windows, um, but not much. And we were plopped. And so this was an interesting one. This started as a host-based penetration test, which means I'm testing the security of like this Windows VPS, basically.
mhm,
And then if I can, you pivot out.
mhm,
And so I found a way to open PowerShell. It turned out that PowerShell was blocked, but not PowerShell ISE. So I could open it like that and, run commands, run scripts. And so we pass that, we capture some hashes and go to pass it. And the problem is, it can communicate with their prod forest, but, the users and everything are different. And so we're, banging our heads, we can like authenticate to a few servers or a few boxes on this dev environment, on this dev forest, but it doesn't lead to anything. We can't we don't dump anything and get anything useful. Okay, cool, fuck. Like, what are we going to do? And so I come up with saying, well, this, dev user is, Sally Junior, and on their prod, I can see Junior Sally. Maybe they reuse their password on both the dev and prod forests. And that's how I ended up compromising and getting DA in that case.
Nice.
So that was password reuse. So that was not a vulnerability that Nessus finds, Bloodhound finds. None of these tools are going to find. That was like a Hail Mary kind of.
Exactly. And this is something, we can transition to, because, like vulnerability scanners and all this stuff is just going to test for CVEs, right? And I have a similar situation, like no vulnerabilities, no, like everything's patched to the max and boom, boom, boom. But then you move into what's called service abuse, right? So now we can start doing, co-browsing and like abusing these services, or, see if there's, SMB client and SMB mapping, and see if there's any open shares. Yeah, it's a vulnerable, but if you're scanning Nessus or Qualys or Rapid7, that's not going to say, okay, like this server is vulnerable because they have a share that's going out. That's not technically a vulnerability, but that's what that out of the box thinking as this, as you're in this trade or whatever in this field. It's like, don't always think, okay, like because your vulnerability scan they didn't find anything, oh, it's a dead end. Because I had a similar, like I said, similar situation, but I had to use, I can never say this damn name. It's for like VLAN hopping. So like Yosemite. So in Linux, you can use this thing. And because we were on a VLAN 101, for example, and what they have is what's called trunking in the networking world. I don't really want this to be network. So like when you pass a trunk, you traverse that data between every single VLAN to the uplink of that port. So if, VLAN 101, 102, etc., and you have what's called DTP, dynamic trunking protocol. So normally the way you do it is statically assign, like, okay, trunk port. If it's automatic, it's dynamically assigned. And if you're not a network engineer, if you just like these kind of people that was in this organization, they were like more like system people, and they just know how to plug in a switch and leave everything default, not really configure the ins and outs of this. So I was able to hop from one of their, on a network on the wireless, and hop to a production network. And once I was able to do that, you can just, run echo logon server, see what logon servers there are, or netdom query. And with these kind of commands, you can see what domain controllers reside, what's the PDC, which is the primary domain controller. Hey, what's up? So with that, then I was like, wow, I can actually see this. And that's when I had some success with compromising some, like you said, you run, once you're on there, you just spin up responder, dump some hashes, and then, pass the hash and do all your crack map exec and do all your fun stuff. But that was the way I was able, I ran Nessus, we used Qualys, but I was able, boom, boom, like nothing. And that's what, like, that whole out of the box thinking, not just going for CVEs or RCEs and doing all this, just trying to execute code and all this stuff, because it's not always going to be that way. On the flip side of that, like then you have like an FTP server running on Windows, and you haven't, you can go out and get a reverse shell ASPX and, try to upload this and blah, blah, blah. Like I've been in situations like that as well. So it's like, it's interesting to know and see different perspectives, like I was able to compromise printers, And some users or some admins or sysadmins or help desk, whatever those folks are for the smaller organizations, they'll use like maybe their service account as a an ad domain admin because when you're a small organization you don't care, right? Like I was that person, right? Like I was a sysadmin for 200 user in my earlier career, and it's like shit, John, like whack whack, oh, access denied. Oh, I don't want to go through the NTFS permissions and user permissions and share. I'm gonna give that dude everything. Boom, everyone, add him to the everyone group, and pretty much a lot of folks do that, and still till today. So it's like we can leverage that. And remember, that's not a vulnerability that a scanner is going to catch. That's just abusing those services that are running SMB or etc. So cool. That was a
Yeah,
lot.
infos and vulnerability scanners are notorious. Like you need to check those.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's an informational in a Nessus scan doesn't mean anything. You have to double check and like confirm what that actually means. Like you said, if it's a share, you have to check the permissions. Like you never know. And on the flip side, in web, it's the same thing, right? Like a burp automated scan, which I pretty rarely use nowadays, but that's not going to check for authentication or authorization issues. It's just not really a possibility, I would say, in its current state. Maybe with some open AI or stuff maybe, but as it sits, it's just not a thing. So it's gonna find the low hanging fruits, but it's not gonna find whole chunks of vulnerabilities, if that makes sense.
Cool. So what do you enjoy doing on your free time? Let's like talk about what do you like doing? I know, like what do you like to do, man?
Like personal stuff. Sure.
Whatever you want to share.
So I like skating. I started lifting a little bit. Um, I read a little bit. I don't know. I download a video game, play for an hour, kind of get over it. I watch a lot of movies and TV shows, although I kind of do that a lot of times while I work as well. It's my ADD brain, so I like to have stuff on in the background. Um, chill with the wife, the cats. I would say the biggest thing I do outside of work is skateboarding, though.
Yeah.
For myself, not like as a relationship.
Yeah. No, and the reason why I'd say that is because folks like they get so sucked into like this, and this is what like me obviously outside of here. Like I'm not a nerd, right? Like I don't do nerd shit, So like that's why I like to go to, like you said, go to the gym, go skate, go play hockey, because if you don't, I think if you don't like disconnect, first you're gonna probably burn. You can love it so much. You if you do something, but if you do one thing so much, you're gonna get burnt out, right? Like if I, play hockey too much, it's like, man, I don't want to see my stick, or I don't want to go see my skates or whatever. It's like too much of one thing is no bueno. So, like, even when I used to study, because people used to ask me, like, I have, quite a few certifications under my belt, and it's like, how can you stay so disciplined? How did you study for all those things? And boom, boom, boom. And I don't just sit there and study, right? Like, maybe it seemed like that after, after like I've accomplished a few certifications, but and the person that Dave that just wrote up what's up, GainSec and me, we're gonna do like the PNPT together. And like doing that together would be awesome, right? We're gonna do it together, but it's like I don't know if it's my ADD, I don't know, but if I'm like head deep into something, I can only be there for so long until I'm like, oh, are the Rangers playing tonight? Oh, uh, what is this person doing? Or like, or whatever. Like my mind is just. And and the reason why I'm bringing that up is like, do you think that's because of like all the distractions, like cell phones, discords, and all those other distractions around us, that it's so hard to focus these days? Or how do you stay disciplined?
I mean, I'm not the best example, to be honest. I mean, I think it's just such a large part of my identity now that like even like when I've switched jobs and it's been like 2 weeks where I don't have an engagement, I'm like, you know, look like I'm like, should I look for vulnerable sites on the internet? You know, like I need to go and show it and like just poke around for fun. You know, like it's such a part of my identity that like if I don't have a hacking engagement, like I'm itching for it, and I'm like, just throw me in, like let's go.
Mhm.
So I don't think I need that discipline in that sense. Like I said, like my baseline, of me as a person, or like as me as my with my career is like, having something to hack. That said, I did jump in like heavy, 80 hours a week, for my first 2 years. And that's why I say that like passion will get you in the room, and then self discipline will like again get you to succeed. And that you will get taken advantage of. You will overwork yourself, like you're saying, like you will get burnt out. And it's really just the balance of you know, understanding yourself and where you're at and saying, okay, I can push to here, but
Mhm.
then, I have to take a step back and come back down to here, because when I reach this point, I'm out, for 6 months, for a year, for 2 years, for, maybe forever if you never, then take a break, basically, right? So I think it's about like your interpersonal communication with yourself and saying, where is my limit, and just acknowledging that and playing to it. So for example, like I'm a big audiobook guy. Like when I
Mhm.
skate, I like to throw on an audiobook, right? So, there's lots of certs that I like study for, but I don't always take the test. But when I
Mhm.
do, study for them, I will sometimes use an audiobook. I'll use the physical book. You know what I mean? And you just got to play to your own strengths and like recognize that in yourself. Um, Again, and then the other side of it is I just tell myself I don't have the option. I don't get to say I'm tired of it. I don't get to say I don't want. Even if, you have to understand your brain's not going to absorb it the same if you're not super interested. I'm just kind of like this is what's smart, this is what's right, like logically. And
Mhm.
so my emotions, they're gonna have to step aside. That's it. And I
Yeah.
hope to get to a point where I have the luxury to, you know, give my emotions more power. But right now, in this set, in this case, like, they have to go on the back burner, basically.
Yeah. That's good to hear. And so I wanted to ask, like, so for someone, I always hear different stories, right? And my take on this is everyone has their own path of life. So I'm new, high school kid, college kid, and I want to be a pen tester. Would you recommend someone like you personally, like if you were off this and some your wife's friends say, "Hey, Jon is a hacker. I want to be a hacker," but would you say, "Okay, come in and join the dark side," or say something like, "Okay, understand the fundamentals of technology, not only web app stuff. Okay, understand like you said before, open up Wireshark and all that, but like go work in the traditional like how at least I learned right. You got to become a help desk and a system guy. Then you can go to the network. Then you can go you know, DevOps or cloud or security or whatever. What is your take on that? Like when folks recommend, like, okay, go the old school traditional, okay, do your help desk, move up the ranks. But like the mayor, right, from TCM Security, he was an actual mayor. I don't know what state, and then he became a pen tester. So he never, did those did that lateral movement or that ladder.
I mean,
So
me
what is your
neither.
take on that? I'm
My
just curious.
first, I was hired by my college to help like one, work on a grant, to like I was a TA, and then three, to help like redevelop their curriculum. And
Hmm.
then, a year later, I was a security consultant, attacking state governments and, Fortune organizations. So I skipped that whole thing too. That said, my baseline is right. My baseline is like, uh, I was interested in computers. I had my own RuneScape private server. I, was interested in email. I was making my own websites. You know what I mean? Like I had my own forums. Like I did this all as a 6-year old, as an 8-year old, all the way up. So by the time I reached college, I already had that baseline. And if you don't have that interest inherently, or don't have the opportunity as a kid, I think it's a lot harder. And I think that's why I can skip that, right? It's
Hmm.
because I kind of had to learn that stuff by troubleshooting my own computer, You know, when I
Mm-hmm.
looked up too many dirty sites when I was 10 or 11, you know what I mean, and ruined it. How do I fix it? You know, you learn these things inherently as a kid because you're more curious, you're more open. You know, and it's kind of like, you know, if you learn a foreign language as a young kid, you pick it up way faster. And I think
Yeah.
that's a big difference. So if you look back at your childhood, or even, you know, right now, and you're like, I don't give a fuck how, like, where, like, you know, for example, the documents folder lives on a Windows computer, you know, like the full path, like, then
Mm-hmm.
yes, you have to go do help desk because you're going to have to get paid to learn, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Either you're going to pay to learn, you're going to do it for free, you know, in your own time, or you're going to be paid to do it. Like, that's it, right? You're going to get a cert that makes you do it. You're going to do it for fun, or you're going to have to, you know, get paid to do it. And a lot of people, they don't want to do anything unless they get paid to do it. So that's my
Yeah.
opinion on it. Do you need it? No. But if your baseline is here, you know, you're gonna have to pick one of those three options.
Yeah. So before we get into that question, Chris of the MMA holds, his name is Chris. Like, let's go Rangers. I'm not sure if he's still on. I don't know what happened with Kane the other day. Looked like something was going on with that guy. But Patty better go back to skate, and hopefully it's going to be a big game on Saturday against Boston. So we'll see how they hold up. Because they didn't look too good last night. But yeah, so let's go Rangers. Let's see how far they can go. But so yeah, so John, yeah, you can go ahead and answer. How'd you enjoy working? How did blah blah blah. So
Mm-hmm.
go ahead, and
So
that's a question for
how did you
you.
enjoy working for Invisium, and how has it changed since NetSpy took over? Okay. Invisium was cool, and I was also like one of the golden children, so it was pretty sweet. You know, when you're at a firm, Invisium was like 36 or 38 of us. You know, it's, yeah, you go above and beyond, and like the whole organization notices. You know, so that's really cool. Um, I also like push them to really start to do more service lines for the end. You know, that like I did solo their first red team, so that was really cool to get them to do that because prior to that they were a source code, thick client, mobile app, and web app like specific firm. They didn't touch anything else. I got them to do some externals, you know, internals, red team. Like that was really cool. All really awesome stuff. So when you're at a boutique firm like that, it's cool to be able to have that effect and see it through. And so yeah, it was cool. How it's changed, I mean, NetSpy is much bigger. God, I don't know. I think NetSpy is close to 600. So that's pretty crazy. You know, that's a lot big difference. It's still pretty new, to be honest. It's been months, but it's still pretty new. I would say the largest changes is just like the compartmentalization. You know, I'm used to being at firms where, you know, either, you know, everyone has a hand in everything, or, you know, everyone communicates a lot. And that's by like the service directors, like they're all pretty separate and don't really communicate with each other. And so, you know, that's why I end up having like a bunch of meetings if I choose to be involved in these service lines, because like, you know, the thick client guy, it does not talk to the web guy. You know what I mean? Like they're completely separate. And so that compartmentalization is pretty interesting. And then the professional budget, it definitely is not limited to one course a year. I know at Invisium it was 4,000 a year. And then, you know, if you wanted more than that, you can get an exception, obviously. To be honest, I think it's a case by case approval at NetSpy, but I know that it could be more than that. Um, but it's a case by case basis. You know, for example, at Invisium, I can just like be like, I want to buy a book on this and like get it. You know, and NetSpy, you know, you just have to ask your manager to go through the ladder. But I don't think there's a specific number. But it's not limited to like one course or anything like that. So yeah, I would say it's as many as you want, especially if you go and get them, you know, and say, look, I got this one now, I want to get this one. And again, as long as they're applicable to your job. So, you know, if you want to get into cloud pen testing and you get, you know, I don't know, AWS security certified, like that they'll, you know, do that. You know what I mean? But if you're like, I want to get a digital forensics cert, like that's irrelevant. They probably won't pay for it.
Yeah. So on that topic, are you, planning on doing any training? I know you said like about certifications, you do the training, but sometimes sitting the exam is not really your cup of tea. But like, is there anything that's in the works for you?
Yeah, I'm looking to move up. I was put in for a promotion before this acquisition, and then I didn't end up going through because of the acquisition. So I'm looking to move to that next level, and then I think I'm going to apply and go to get my master's. So
Nice.
that's yeah, that to me speaks more, and also like I'm looking to get into more of the managing side of the director side of it, of running your firm. I'm looking to like get into that side of the industry now, and I think that like of course I could get like a project managing certified whatever the hell it is, but like to
Like a
me, a
PNP.
master's, yeah, I think a master speaks more than that. But
Mhm.
again, I mean that's all in the pretty far future. I have some personal stuff, so
Yeah,
um,
no, exactly. And that's what it really boils down to, right? Like it all depends on what we want to do with our lives. Like you and I, we have two different paths, right? Like me and the next guy have two different paths. That's why one thing I never really like tell I always tell folks, that's what I'm gonna say. I always tell folks like don't try to be like XYZ. Like, yeah, you have your maybe it sounds contradicting, but like, yeah, you do have your folks that like when I was coming up, I had someone that I looked up to, like a mentor, right? Like my mentor was this person, and then that person was like, okay, like I'm sure 99% of the people know it's Keith Barker from CBT Nuggets. Like literally, like when I was coming up, I would always watch him, and if I was setting up an ASA firewall back then, I would have his videos up and just watching him do it, like or Palo Alto or whatever he was, studying or teaching. And that's what really got me into the interest of teaching, right? Like I'm like, okay, like he made something that sticks in my head forever. It's like if you can teach something, that means you really know it. And I never really understood what that meant. I'm like, oh, I can teach someone how to bowl. Doesn't mean I really know how to bowl, right? Like, oh, I can teach someone how to do a tray flip, but doesn't mean I really know how to do a tray flip really good. But when he really said that, and then he told me how to practice, like, okay, talk in the mirror, talk to your daughter. It's like, okay, even though you have no idea what I'm talking about, but if I can talk about three-way handshake, sin active, not all this stuff that if you can really teach that, that means you really know it. And then once he said that, I was like, oh, that's why I got, that's why I was a technical trainer for, that's because I applied at CBT Nuggets, but then I didn't have that experience, and then working at Next Gen C, having that experience with teaching and cybersecurity and all that stuff really, really, you know, justified what he said was correct. And I was like, wow, this is really, really cool. And I know Friday nights are probably like a a slow night, and probably people are out and about at or still working. But I'm not sure who's on if they have any questions for myself or John. But we'll probably start wrapping it up in a few minutes. Uh, but yeah, any questions? And I really want to thank you, John, and hopefully everything goes well on with the new acquisition and a new gig, and everything that's going on in your world goes well. But
thank you. Yeah, so I left in Stratum for a very substantial increase in salary. And then as for promising courses, NetSpy has their own university program, so they kind of lean heavily on that. I will say that like I would like to at least like again like study or read more about like Azure pen testing and GCP like Google Cloud, because those are two that I think I've done like a few Azure semi cloud audit pen test type of things, but not like a full fledged one. So those are two that I definitely want to get into. But like again, I mean, as for web, like the port trigger stuff, you can't really go wrong with that. And yeah, Pat, I'm down to do this as much as you want, whenever you want. So
yeah, man. Yeah, and next time we'll get like more into topics and talk about latest and greatest vulnerabilities and all this cool stuff. But yeah, I guess we'll wrap up. And if no one has any other questions, or if there is any questions after the stream, after all this stuff, leave a comment and down below. If there's any questions, and if it's for me, I'll answer it. If it's for John, you know,
you'll tell
you know,
me and I'll answer it.
yeah. So if there's, is there a way that people can connect with you? You know, how is that?
Sure. I mean, I'm at GainSec in a lot of places. I think Instagram's a little different, but I don't really use Instagram anymore. But at GainSec on Twitter works. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn with GainSec. And yeah, just go to GainSec, gainsec.com. Basically, you'll find all from my resume to an example report to my social media. It's all there. So
Cool.
All
And
right,
obviously,
man.
everyone knows where to connect with me, InfoSecPat, pretty much everywhere. But sounds good, Jon. Thank you so much, and for everyone out there, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, have a good one, folks.
Thanks.
See you.